feel like Kobe in the fourth.
This is the Dane and Moore NBA podcast coming at you Wednesday morning. It's October 18th. The Wolves played and won their fourth preseason game on Tuesday night against Maccabi Ra'anana. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about that game at the end of this episode. It was a capital P preseason game in that the Wolves didn't even play their top 10 players. But maybe Jason and I will talk a little bit about Leonard Miller, Josh Minott, Luka Garza. It is Wednesday. So I do have Jace Frederick here with me. And Jason.
Don't act like it wasn't a big game, though, because you can't go 103-0 unless you win the fourth one.
They did start 4-0 in the preseason last year.
Ooh. Yeah, and what a successful year. They made the playoffs.
They did.
Great tone setter.
They
you
did.
saw how they bursted out of the regular season gates? It was a huge tone setter.
It was the fifth preseason game that everyone went, uh-oh,
because that was when Rudy and Carl played in. Yeah.
Rudy and Carl played. It was against small Brooklyn.
Yep.
Was Cam Johnson on that team? And I always just picture Cam Johnson as like the guy who just this team.
No, he was not.
He was not on the team.
He was not on the team. No.
They did.
It was Irving, Durant, and even Simmons was playing in that. And yeah, they did struggle.
Simmons was playing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That is always reminds me of how fast this roster churn stuff is. And I've just been like thinking about that from a Wolves standpoint.
I like that you laughed at Simmons playing for him. And
he still plays
for them. Yeah, right. You're like, Jesus, Simmons was playing for him.
Totally.
It's like, yeah, the guy who's like the focal point of their team now.
Yeah. It is just crazy, man, how much the roster stuff churns. And when you're a team like the Wolves, where you're like, it's going to go one of two ways. Like, it's going to be really good and it's going to work, or it's going to be okay or not work. And then everything changes. It's just the way the NBA is now. It's like you hit it or you break it up. And
that is like what makes me, I don't know if appreciate's the right word, but like you understand almost the rareness that they are bringing back a very similar roster this year, because there are fewer and fewer teams like that are decent do that, like and no major overhaul shakeup. And like, I am a believer that can lead to like good results, that is part of a process of like building a team that can make a push is like a little consistency. And they finally have that. And like, that just made me think of that.
Yeah. I mean, they seem to be referencing that a lot this year. And I would say in the continuity part, and seemingly in a genuine way, like, you know, there's some players that you talk to and you really believe when they say something, because they give you the hard stuff when the hard stuff has to be there. And, you know, some guys like Kyle Anderson and stuff like that comes to mind. And I'm like, I'm hearing him say that stuff, that the continuity matters. They're having fun. They're super dialed. And that makes me believe it a little bit, that the continuity factor in particular is having a positive impact, which I think does tie into kind of our first topic, which we were talking about last night, is just like this idea that what it would mean if the bigs thing did work. Like, if that wasn't a question mark, if we get a month into the season and that isn't something that grates on this team. I think last season, particularly like a month into the season, some of the players were like, you could just kind of tell, and some of them said to us in media availabilities, like, this is hard.
Yeah.
This playing with two bigs, we're getting run. And there wasn't a great belief in that double big look, I think, at all until the trade deadline. And then maybe like once Mike got here and once Carl came back, then there was that little bit of belief in it again. And that's what everyone was like, oh, Nas week, right? And there's like, it was so meaningful to the psyche, I think, when everyone believed in the bigs. And I wonder about that now, if like we get into a month of the season and that's not the problem. Like, I think the question I'm asking is what if the bigs thing does work? What impact does that have on the psyche of this group? Because the inverse had an impact on the psyche last season.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big thing, right? Like, we saw what it looked like in the first 20 plus games last year when it was clear that guys did not believe in it. And it definitely was treated, I think, in the minds of many, like that having two bigs, they weren't seeing the benefits. They were only seeing the drawbacks, like the players. And they were like, it was literally like, well, transition getting back. Well, it's hard, like, well, I guess all the guards just have to get back, like every single time, like as if they were being asked to like push this huge boulder up a hill. But it was that. And it was like guys looking at each other like, what do you expect us to do? Like a lot of that got pinned on D'Lo. It was a lot of guys who felt that way. Sure. It was not just D'Lo who felt like this is not workable. I think Austin Rivers, like in his podcast with Bill Simmons, when they talked about the Wolves this year, they're like, they got to figure out the two bigs thing. Like that showed like a lot of guys just didn't really think it was going to work, and it didn't work to start the year. And it was really ugly as they kind of tried to work through things. And like, the sample at the end of the season looked decent, but that's a small one too. So who's to say? But you just see like how much it kills the team spirit and creates a little bit of a rift, like here and there with guys when like they just don't think what is being asked of them is doable, or they don't think like the max product. They're like, this would be a lot easier if we didn't have this setup that we're sitting in right now. It makes my life harder. Like, so if you don't have that, if you have something that you think actually benefits you, and it's anything in life, anybody can picture this. It's not even just related to the bigs. Like if you think that what you're working in at work or whatever is like maximizing you and it's going to work and it's best for everybody, like you're going to bring a better mindset every day. You're going to be more willing to do the little things to do.
And
your
if
job,
you don't, you're going to start talking behind people's back at the cubicle or whatever.
You have to believe in the cause, and you have to believe in the plan of attack. Otherwise you're not going to execute the plan of attack. We like to all think, even if I don't believe in the plan, it's what like the higher ups have come up with. So I'll do my best. You don't do your best. If you don't believe in it, you don't do everything that's required to make something work. Like when you believe in it is when you give your best.
You asked Finch about this last night after the game. Let's play that clip
for the pod. So
he talked about punting on offensive rebounding at the start of last year. How much do you feel like better about the plan you have for this multi-big lineup? And does it feel like you have to have something and stick to it, because with Nas in the rotation, there's just no backing out of it?
Everybody, like Mike Tyson said, everyone feels great until they get hit in the face, right? So everyone loves their plan, but we look comfortable. Nas looks comfortable. It doesn't look like it's something we have to pivot away from in any sort of panic. I think the key is if we do, we still have Kyle. We can swing there and play at the 4. Finding the key, I think, for us is still going to be able to maximize certain combinations on the floor of guys that we know play really well together. I think that's going to be the real kind of key for us as we figure things out. But we're all in. We're committed to being a bigger team. We're lucky to have skilled bigs. So they don't. It's not like you have to change our style too much. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
It's a must, right? Like the commitment. Like even if you do get hit in the mouth and like it looks bad for a couple games, like everybody has to be committed, right? Because it doesn't feel like last year everybody was always committed in the locker room and whatnot. Like there just seemed like there were questions about it. Do you feel like everybody's really bought in?
100%. Yeah, no, for sure. I think everybody's committed. I think this team really enjoys it. Enjoys playing with each other. I think they've really been a pleasure to coach through training camp so far. Rudy took one shot the other night in New York, and there was never a peep about anything. Didn't grumble, didn't give anyone the side eye, wasn't bitchy when he came to the bench. Like, how it played out. He generated a ton of wide open shots with his rolling and his dunker gravity. We got 10 wide open corner threes just as a result of, I would say, 7 or 8 of them because he was on the floor. And it feels like we have a maturity about what we're trying to do this year. So.
Wanted to play that whole thing because I think that good question, Jace, but also
I think so too.
An interesting way I think for Finch to answer that with like throwing out, which was just one thing I appreciate about Finch. I think actually all 29 other coaches in the league go, we're committed to it, we believe in it. He throws out the like, well, if we do struggle with the Nas part, we do have Kyle, which acknowledges just the reality of any proposition, right? Even if it's a 90% chance it's going to work, there's a 10% chance it doesn't.
You better have a plan B. You should always have a plan B.
And I think he part of the reason, you do feel so confident that you can go into two of Cat, Naz, and Rudy on the floor at a time is that, why I think he feels confident about it is like, if we do for a while, like struggle with that, we do have Kyle, and that almost gives him confidence in the idea in the first place, right? If Kyle Anderson isn't on the team, then, and that's all you got, that weirdly makes you less confident in the double big idea in the first place, because if it crumbles, it crumbles. If there's a crack in the surface of the centers, they feel like they can figure some of that out. I think as you were talking before that, and we were mentioning D'Lo and some of the other players, and then, he's kind of going there talking about the bigs and their belief. I really do think so much of this idea of like, what impact do the bigs working have? It's actually on the guards, because I feel like the guards are the ones who live most skeptical of it. Or like you were saying, it has kind of the greatest impact on them. It's the hardest for them to play with. So it's like, if you got the guards bought into it, or they really see and feel the impact of it, I think the value of that is exponential. Does that make sense with what I'm trying to say? Which is really Ant, right?
Yes,
Can
it's Ant.
It's be all about it.
Yep, it's Ant. And I think Ant, it's like he has to understand the ways in which it can work for him, and like not dwell on any negatives of it. Yeah, there'll be times where maybe there are slightly fewer driving lanes, like because the spacing is a little wonky here or there. Now they're putting in some structure to like try to alleviate that or reduce the number of times that it happens, but it's not going to be as open of a floor as if you just play with just Cat or just Nuts. Like, it's just not. But you have to understand then how you can use the guy in the dunker spot to your advantage and those types of things. Like, and I do think that's even why Finch purposely brings up the Gobert thing, just getting one shot against the Knicks, right? Is like, he's sacrificing some, because it, like, on this team, it's less built around him, especially offensively, and like he's less a focal point of it. And if he's going to sacrifice some of the things in his game for the betterment of the team and not say anything about it, everybody else should be willing to do the same as well. And I would say even a year ago, like, yep, guys were kind of griping about spacing and whatnot, like with Gobert and Cat out there, especially as they did not have it figured out in the first 20 games. And Gobert would also gripe as well after games when he only got 2 shots in a loss or something, and he'd be like, I guess I need to make it more clear. I guess I need to make myself even more available, that those things happen. So I think they really need to create a culture this year of like, in general, this can work. This can be for the betterment of this team, but it might require everybody changing what they do, or just a little bit less, or just accepting the night where something was a little bit harder, because as long as the team succeeds, we're all better for it.
I feel like the Rudy gripes on the floor, though, like the outward exasperation, was more on the defensive side of the floor last year.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I'm not saying that to take, because he said those things, right? He was, there was definitely times post game he was frustrated of not getting the ball more, but I think what Rudy cares about more is defense, right? And being put in position to be the elite defender that he is. I think if he feels more insulated defensively, which is not a high bar going off of last season, I just think he'll be cool with like kind of the Finch thing. I don't think there will be the offensive gripes. Like, I'm kind of buying into the idea that Rudy is buying into the idea of being an elite role player on this team, which I think is just kind of a fundamental truth of what needs to happen for this, particularly the double bigs, to work.
Yeah, I agree. And it totally is something where I think Ant seems very open to like the 2 big thing here in training camp. Rudy seems like you said, bought into like being maybe like
Ant is the one where I'm like, it's the Mike Tyson thing.
I even think that way of
in the face.
I even think that way of Rudy too, though. Like,
okay,
I just very much like, okay, winning, if you come out of the gates and you're just a great team, I think everybody will be bought in. I think if you come out and it's slow, or it's not as crisp or easy as it was in the preseason, and like, maybe you go up against a couple teams that do run you a little bit, and maybe you lose by 8, but it's because they got up and down in transition or whatnot, and Ant struggled to kind of dissect the defense. Like, that's when I want to see everybody. I mean, I agree that
that's going to be Toronto,
easiest,
right?
That's like it's a very interesting opening matchup, I think, for sure. Like, because it's that's one of those teams where it's like the Wolves have to flex their interior dominance, which they did not do last season, and show that they can handle a team trying to get up and down the court.
Because they're going to run them, yeah.
And they've got the Wolves killer, Dennis Schroeder, who, like, I mean, put the team in a vice, like, 3 different times last season with his on-ball defense. Yeah. But, yeah, it'll be a great test. I just think, like, what I meant to ask Finch about with Nas is, like, now with Nas being paid and being a cemented part of the rotation, like, remember the start of last year, he wasn't even supposed to be in the games. Like, they were totally planning on going, yeah. Cat, yep, Rudy, together for a little bit, and then we will stagger them, and then we'll bring them back together. And certainly they will be staggered still, but it will be with another big out on the floor. Like, Nas will be out there. It's mostly going to be 2 bigs. I actually think that's going to help a lot. I think you have to be more committed to it, but there's really no veering off of it. Like, I don't think they're just going to stop playing Nas if 6 games into the season it's not going great. And I think it's going to be easier to create an identity when you do have 2 bigs all the time. And it's not like we need to create this big guy identity, even though we only have 2 bigs out there together for like 15 minutes.
Well, then it becomes your nature, right?
Right. Like, now you're going to look for ways that it can dominate the game, and you're going to stick to those ways, and you're going to know those ways because you're spending all game with it. So, like, I think the commitment to it is going to make them better in the long run. Like, we're going to know for sure if it works or not. There's no really like, well, we can just sneak the minutes of Cat and Gobert out there, like, to start the game and end the game and hope it looks really good in between. Like, no, you're a big team. You're going to be a big team at all times. Figure out ways in which being a big team can dominate games.
I asked Nas about this at practice the other day. I thought this was an interesting answer and just a relevant question for them of, like, a lot of people don't believe in this. What do you, as a big, think about it? So here's Nas.
When you talk about how your bigs are really athletic, there's certainly a narrative out there that this team is too big, right? There's too many bigs on here that might not be able to work. When you hear that, when people say this team has too many bigs, what is your reaction to that?
I mean, I think just as far as, like, Cat and I think we're just in big bodies. Like, we can play all over the floor. Defensively, we're both getting better at it. Like, and then, like, for Rudy, it's like he's been Defensive Player of the Year. He's always been that top big man, and it's like you can't deny that. And that goes in just, you know, getting the reps in preseason. You know, getting to learn each other, getting to know each other. Like I said before, again, what they like and what I like, and it's going to be huge. I'm excited for it. I mean, it's something that, you know, I don't think a lot of people are believing in, but I mean, I've watched it work for the first 3 games. Like I said, I know it's preseason, but I think there's something that can, you know, we can really move forward with and have help us.
Do you think, like, you and Cat at the 4 is the biggest thing that has to be proven defensively? You and Cat defending at the 4 is the thing that has to be proven?
Huge. That's huge because it's like that's something that we've consistently done throughout my 5 years and however long he's been in the league. So it's like that's definitely going to be huge. But again, like, the maturity and our growth mindset, we always want to grow. So that's going to be huge.
I think Nas is an interesting, like, factor in this because he has to believe in it, right? That's his route out of the floor for 20 minutes. Though at the same time, like, I don't think anything about that answer is not genuine. I think Nas Reed legitimately thinks of himself as just a guy that's in a big body, like, you know, like a wing who's in a big body. Like, I don't think
he looks more like that than Cat does. He's just more fluid. So
that's the distinction, right?
Yeah, like, he looks more like a wing in a big's body than Cat does.
And I think they're going to use him differently at the 4 than they are Cat. Like, even defensively, you know, like, I think we talked a lot last year about, particularly once Cat got back from the injury, they tried like crazy to not put him in chasing situations, like, which makes sense. He's coming back from a calf, but also just kind of with Cat's game, like, can we switch this off? Can we send Mike onto the stretch 4? Like, whatever. Do you I feel like with Nas, like, they're just going to kind of play it straight up, and they're going to be like, all right, you are on Cam Johnson, like, chase him. Or maybe with the best of the stretch 4s, they accommodate with Nas a little bit, and how much as a backup will he see those? But generally speaking, I feel like you just let Nas kind of go, and you let him be a 4, and you let him sink or swim, and you trust the fact that he's kind of like, he's definitely more twitchy than Carl, right? As like an athlete and being able to navigate some of that stuff. I think we do a lot of like the cat Nas, the same thing idea. And obviously in some ways that's true. I think defensively there's a distinction to be made there though.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either if it's like Nas is the 4, but the 4 in this matchup's a really bad matchup, and the 3 is maybe somebody who's just not as impactful of an offensive player. So let's just switch that out. I think with like Cat and the starters, I do anticipate more game planning, more like we're going to pre-switch this action, these types of things, like ready to go. Where when the reserves get out there and you don't know the lineups, it's very hard to be like, here's what we're going to do here. So yeah, I do think there will be more times where it's like, all right, now it's like figure it out. Here's your switching partners, whatever. But in general, here's the plan. Yeah, I think so. I think Nas just by coming off the bench and you don't know who you're going to match up against exactly like at all times. Like I think it is going to be more figure it out on the fly. Where Cat, at least with the starting lineups, I bet they have more game plan stuff kind of built in of like, we don't love this matchup, but we think we can switch here and not have you in too many different situations. Like, yeah, the calf was a part of it, but it also just worked. And it also just makes more sense in general of how to like not get exposed by Cat being in a lot of matchups that you'd be like, he's going to have a hard time guarding him. Because there are a lot of NBA starting lineups where it's like, Cat's going to have a hard time guarding A, B, C, D, E, F, G, K, L, M, N, O, P. Like, I mean, you know, like there's a lot. So I think they can work around that. And I think with Nas, it's like you're going up against different reserves and whatnot. You just can take your chances more often.
I think probably just off the top of my head, like I think the 3 most tiring positions to be defensively are the guy on the ball, right? Just the point of attack defender. That's tough. You got to navigate the screen. You got to guard the ball. I think another really hard one is being the big up in coverage, showing and recovering. Like that's kind of like, you know, get down, touch the free throw line, go touch the baseline. Like that's tough. And then the third hardest one, I think, is just chasing a shooter, right?
Chasing a shooter. I think that maybe is the most exhausting.
And
frankly.
and they're all up there, and they're
the
all
other ones require more physicality and stuff. I think chasing a shooter is like cardio. Like it's the most cardio you're going to do in a game.
And so it's like Carl's going to be up in coverage, doing that from time to time. That's somewhat physically taxing. And if you don't want, like, you do need to like weigh some of this cardio stuff when he is such an important factor on your offensive side of the floor. It's not like the Luka Doncic's and the other like super high volume off. Like that's the reason why Giannis like plays the 4 and has for a long. I mean, obviously that works for him, but like that job, Giannis would be really good as a 5. That'd be harder and more physically taxing, like you said, from like a collision standpoint, but also just from a movement standpoint. Like it's okay to put in some precautions in place to like limit Cat's physical exertion on the defensive side of the ball. And I think they have the personnel to do that.
Yes, you can always hide one player on defense pretty well. And this is a big problem with like D'Lo last year is you're trying to hide one of the bigs and D'Lo, like that was hard. And now when you look at the lineup, and it's like you don't have to hide Conley and
you used to have to hide Ant, and now you don't have to hide.
Yeah, you don't have to hide Ant anymore as long as he's paying attention to like actions and off-ball movement and whatnot. But either way, that's not like a hiding situation. And even like then, you know, Nikhil goes into that mix as well. Like you should rarely have to hide anybody but the 4 or whatever. Like that's your bad matchup. So you can game plan around that, and it shouldn't be that difficult to where it's just a glaring we can't stop anybody because we have this matchup at the 4.
Particularly in the regular season.
Like, yes.
Totally
Playoffs,
navigate.
Easier to expose. Regular season, we talked about this all the time. Teams don't have time. Like, even if it's not a back-to-back, like there's one day off in between. They're not coming up with a new game plan and then like 5 sets of here's how we're going to expose this. There's just too much going on to constantly be diving that deep into a matchup.
All right, Jace, let's move over to Mike Conley. I think it's awesome this year that you are going to every other week have a one-on-one sit down with Mike and just kind of break it down with him. I mean, you and I haven't been around him that long, but he's up there for both of us as most informative player we've covered, period. I mean, probably the most. And I think that's going to be particularly valuable this season where there's a lot of nuance to this team, right? And I really appreciate, as a media person, like the willingness to answer our questions, because like I think Mike gets the idea that we're trying to figure things out that like make perfect sense to them because they're in the huddle, you know, or like they're at practice. Like this is what we're trying to get to, and this is what we're working on. Mike does a really good job of distilling that information, giving it to us and our lower basketball IQs, and allowing us to share that with the fans. I think this is going to be awesome with Mike. I want to talk about your first article with him, but
off that, like,
give him the pitch.
Yeah, okay, but just like in Mike in general, like the thing that I like most about talking to somebody like Mike is like when we talk to him, it becomes sometimes like abundantly clear of like, no, like the scheme isn't that bad. We're not executing it right. And it's an honest thing of like, here's what we're not doing right. And so it's not just like, well, the game plan's good, we're just not doing it. It's like, here's where we are messing up. And then you look back and it's like, oh yeah, so that guy's supposed to be doing this and they're not. And here's what we should be doing more against switching defenses that you can't really coach, you just have to do it, and we're not, and things like that, or here's what's going well, all that stuff. So yeah, I basically was like, well, here's like the most informative player that I've covered, I think, honestly, like on all topics. There's never been something that he shied away from, like, Rudy, like, quote unquote, punches Kyle, like Mike's right there after the game and he will give you a like shrugged off answer about it. And it might just be like emotions get high, whatever, but he talks about anything. And it's so valuable. And it's legit honest insight. And so it was like, okay, here's a guy that I would love to talk to about the team, about maybe something that happens in the league, like a trend, about himself, because he's also just an integral part of this team. And he's also somebody who's willing to do something like this, which is a massively key part of it. Guess what? If I asked to talk to Ant once every 2 weeks, regardless, it would be a no. And that is not a knock on Ant. That's the answer most guys would give. Mike Conley is so giving of his time to all of us members of the media, me, you, Bally Sports, whatever. Like he just understands the value of it and is willing to share his time to give to us, which is great because it is in turn giving to the fans as well. And so he said, sure. And this first time around, I just wanted to talk about, this 36-year-old point guard just turned 36 this last week. So it was kind of timely, kind of being perceived as this older player, as even I think I viewed him as that in the past, and whatnot. And many others have too. And yet his production at the end of last season suggested that he's far from this aging, declining player. And so we talked a lot about that.
Yeah, you've said this to me for a while now where you're like, like Steph Curry is the same age.
I actually got the Steph thing from that conversation.
Really?
Yeah. So like that.
You said the KD thing to me at one point.
KD was earlier. I had that in my head because I saw an NBA's account. KD turns 35 today, like last month. And I was interesting. And so I brought up KD to him and then he brings up Steph, and I looked it up. I'm like, wow, yeah, you and Steph are like the same age. And the next day we were on this podcast and I was like, same age as Steph Curry. So he brought that one up. And
but here's the thing. It's like, okay, obviously let's get the disclaimer out there. Like Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, LeBron James, levels above Mike Conley as a player. But what's interesting is like what allows those players to continue to be superstars is their coaches continue to empower them with the role of superstar.
Right.
You know what I'm like?
Just the whole idea is that you continue to get to do your role. Mike Conley's never been Steph Curry, but Mike Conley at 36 can be Mike Conley at 28. That's the argument because Steph Curry at 36 looks a lot like, or 35 looks a lot like Steph Curry at 28. It's like, it's not that he's the same level as those guys. It's that he can be the same version of himself, maybe even a wiser version, much like those guys are too.
And effective and putting up numbers comparable to other, in KD's case, like other stud small forwards or, and Mike comparable efficiency or production of other really good point guards in the league. And I think that, it's like, has been really wise, I think, from the Wolves front office and from Chris Finch to like give him that. I'm not sure how many teams would have done that. It is the natural like curve. And Mike was talk to you about this of like, you kind of get to this age and like, if you're 36, you're still in the league and kind of got my game. Like they kind of put you in the corner, hit 40 some % of your corner threes, like very situational. And I think it's
your Dallas Jason kid.
Yeah. And they're not doing that. I do think it's worth acknowledging that comes with some risk, right? Because even if we go through like Steph, KD, LeBron, like those guys are missing games every year, like a chunk, probably all will this year. And like that should be the expectation with Mike, is that he has to miss a period of time because the likelihood that he's going to get hurt is up there, right? And he's not like a clean bill of health guy for the entirety of his career. He's had the heel thing, right? You listen to him off the heel, hamstring, like he's had a handful of different things, and like maybe playing 30 plus minutes a game at 36 years old is going to increase the odds that something like that happens again. I do think, though, given the alternatives, right, where you had a situation with D'Lo that wasn't going anywhere, that was a risk that makes sense for them to have taken. Is like, they know that, right? They know that there's a chance that Mike gets hurt, and they're probably in trouble for 20 games or whatever that ends up being. But given the alternative, like that risk kind of like is what it is, and you take it. You just got to take it because the alternative isn't good.
Yeah, and like honestly, like what's the risk that anybody misses 15 games? Like, and Mike's is higher, but it's not like it's like Mike's is 37 and somebody else's is 4. You know, like Mike's is probably like 25 and somebody else's is 15. Like at some point you do take those risks, and there are certainly times where you can manage minutes or whatnot and be like, okay, let's keep him around 28 or for this stretch here because we've got a lot of games in the next 2 weeks or whatever. And okay, we have 2 games off after this, so let's have him play 36 tonight, whatever. Yeah, it's a risk, but I just think he's so integral into what they're doing. So if you're trying to continue to build this up and succeed and build continuity and establish like the way you want to play and guys' roles, like Mike is such a key factor in doing that, I think, on a night-to-night basis and making sure that guys are playing the way they need to play and where they need to be, that he's got to be out there a lot. And I think he's comfortable with that. And the good thing about his minutes are, yes, he'll like initiate the offense and whatnot, and yes, he'll guard certain guys, but he's not getting the toughest defensive matchup unless it's like a switch, which very well might happen and whatnot. But
and particularly with the emergence of Nikhil, like he moves further down that pecking order.
Correct.
That's nice.
I still think if it's like a Steph or a Dame, it's probably like I still think they've identified Mike as like the best, smartest guy to navigate
screens,
3 stagger screens. You know, like and that proved true, I think, last year as well. But yeah, like, you know, he'll be on the ball for sure when it's the him and Rudy minutes, but not at other points where Ant will just be on the ball more. Like Mike will get the action started and that's it. But he like feels just as good. He said he feels better than he felt at 30 because that is when he was hurt. Like he feels pretty similar to the guy he was when he was 28, 29, not like 25. But you know,
again, another guy I believe when they say that.
Too. Yeah, I do too.
He goes through the bullshit.
He's not a BSer. He's really not. He's honest, because there'd be him saying he's not the same player wouldn't change anything. You know, like it wouldn't change a single thing for him. Like so when I do think that, I'm not the same athlete I was when I was 25. Like he would tell you that, but I'm pretty close to the guy I was when I was 28, 29. And I'm now just smarter and whatnot. And frankly, like he's a better shooter than he certainly was coming out of college. Like, and there are just certain things that he has gotten better at that have, I think, kind of wiped clear any athletic drop off.
I would agree with that. And I mean, I do think it is worth noting that like this is a risk too.
Yeah,
and I'm with it. I'm with it. It makes sense. The logic, again, the deal of the trade, the picks, you got the keel, like all of that. But if there wasn't this like cloud of risk of like what's going to happen with the 2 bigs, the thing, particularly at this time of year when we're literally picking into every nit possible because there's no real basketball going on, I would be talking about this, and I would be like, if Mike has to miss 2 months, what global impact does that have on the team? I'm not saying that's the most likely situation.
Yeah.
But like
he's the most important player on the team. I honestly think that.
Wow. Yeah, it's hard to define, but it's not outlandish to say that, where I think a lot of people
just like they don't have a single option to replace him. That's what I'm saying. That's why. It's not that like, oh, Mike's better than Ant or something. It's like if Ant
move that out,
Cat becomes more of an offensive focal point, Nikhil plays, you don't really drop off defensively at all. Sure, like you'll lose some games because you don't have a scorer, dynamic player like Ant, But like Mike, it's like, oh, now what do we do at starting point guard? And like you've shown with that starting lineup, you need a facilitator. You don't really have one. J-Mac's not going to start. Shake going in there and starting. It's a totally different dynamic. Like,
and I think it'd be Nikhil.
Yeah, probably. And I think defensively it'd be, still strong, but like offensively, I don't know if they would have much direction.
Turnovers go way up.
Yeah, right. Bad decisions, like stagnancy when there shouldn't be any. I very much think Mike is such a necessity. We even saw last year, like when J-Mac was out, it was like you can't take D'Lo off the court because they don't have a real point guard. Like we talk so much about, well, this guy could get us into our action and this guy could get us into our action. But when you play without a point guard, Boston's thought the same thing in the past. And when you don't have a point guard on the court, it looks terrible for some stretches of time. Like it's just somebody who can dribble the ball up the court and deliver the first pass. Like point guards do more than that.
Let's move over to the game from last night quickly, just because I feel like it's worth hitting on like a little bit of like Josh Minott, Leonard Miller, Luka Garza, because we're not going to probably talk about them for a while because they're probably not going to play as the season gets going, right? I do feel like
something went wrong.
Yeah. And I'm sure we'll talk about it at the time. Like, oh, what does it mean to put Luka Garza in as the Josh Minott is the window is here, like. And maybe that does happen at some point where one of them have to get in there. But I think with Garza, Minott, and Miller to varying degrees is like longer term pieces of like, can you develop them in conjunction with a plan that probably has nothing to do with them, right? Like that's kind of what you're working with those guys. And Luka's kind of a little bit different. He's not on a long-term contract. He's older. Whatever. Plus, I think we've already talked about Luka Garza a lot. Like, we kind of know what Luka Garza is. Yeah, he scored 30 last night against a non-NBA team. Quite frankly, that probably like didn't meet expectations for even like,
sure, right. Yeah.
Whatever. I thought that. So
I would say with Luka, just with Finch's comments last night, like I thought what was really interesting is like one of the reasons they keep bringing Luka back is they do love how hard he works and the example he sets for guys like Josh and Wendell. Like
he did say that.
There's a lot of value for that, and I don't know if a lot of teams are using those positions for that. Like this is a guy who is just doing things the right way. So like our Josh Minott type kind of lottery tickets, like see on a daily basis, even in Iowa, like what they should be doing.
Right. Thought Josh was good last night in the context of that game. And really in the, like I was decently underwhelmed with Minott Summer League. Right. And, though if he would have played like he did last night throughout Summer League, I would have set a different tone or tune, sung to a different tune, whatever. I thought he looked like the player I wanted him to be in Summer League last night. And that's somewhat noteworthy. And like, okay, we're seeing a little bit of progression here where like Wendell Moore is kind of the inverse of that. Like I am with the idea that Summer League or playing against a team not from the NBA and Wendell Moore being asked to kind of be a focal point is just not his thing. But at some point, like Wendell Moore has to show the coaching staff, the front office, something more than that one game when he guarded Ja Morant. Like, and that just has not happened yet. It didn't happen last night. And I was just like taking some notes during the game and I'm like, man, Wendell has a team option for next season for $2.5 million, which is like $300K above the minimum. Like it's not much, but they have to make that decision by Halloween of this month. And it's unfortunate, but I think that should be an open question, right? Because it's not like, oh, this is some $300K extra cap hit. Like, no big deal. It's a question of like, it's a spot, right, man? That's what I'm thinking about with like Wendell for next year. And I think even if they didn't pick that up, I think Wendell's definitely in the NBA next season. Another team gives him a shot, but like, this is in theory like a top 10 team in the NBA, right? And should be progressing next season. Maybe he needs to be doing something, maybe in practice or stuff we don't see that says like, this guy is worth keeping on the roster because we think he could eventually crack the rotation. I don't know what we have to go off of that says he's for sure that yet. So while Minott and Miller I thought were encouraging last night, I just wanted that to be a game where like Wendell Moore played like Dacian Nix, right? Like he makes like 4 or 5 threes, looks comfortable out there, and he just wasn't. And it's tough because I think he's a good kid, good pedigree, like
good worker, all that stuff. Yeah.
But like, when is it going to happen? When is something going to happen that makes you go, yep, that's for sure an NBA player. I want that guy. That's a good deal at $2.5 million. Like I don't feel that way at the moment with Wendell.
He's not like Christian Braun anyway, but like Braun is kind of like the player where like he's supposed to maybe fit that kind of mold. And Braun in a game like that would have like had 20 points and made a few dazzle plays. Like I just wonder with like Wendell Moore, Chris Finch always talks about this, like you need a skill. You need like a high level NBA skill that you can kind of hang your hat on and then work from there. And I don't know what Wendell's is. I don't know. And maybe like somebody in the organization will be like, what's this? But I haven't seen
and it very well could be. We have so little
right.
It's
we have
crazy how little exposure we have to
no data, but it is just in like in the few times we've gotten, like it's very clear with like Josh Minott, you can see like, okay, well, he's already good at this. And I've even seen that in his limited NBA game experience. He can bring certain things. And certainly like the whole idea with like Leonard Miller or Josh Minott is they have to have skills that they can hang their head on, that they can go in and be the 10th guy in an emergency and play 8 minutes. And they're going to give you A or B, like, and that's what you need to feel comfortable. But like you see skills they have, and now it's just like refining or almost narrowing the focus. Where with Wendell, I'm like, I'm not sure what that thing is where it's like, well, he is really good at A or B, and then he'll continue to grow other parts of his game. I don't know what that thing is where it's like, he is a great shooter, a great defender. Like, cause honestly, like, I don't know if he's like a great defender because one game, like when John Morant struggles against like the Rudy Gobert Wolves a lot, so I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm cheering for it. Like I want that, and I hope that's
he was
developing.
Like a great guy, and a super hard worker, and they swear by him, and he's in the gym all the time, and like there's value in that being around your organization. Those are the types of guys that the Wolves have gone out of their way to accrue, and it makes sense. And I think it's working in a positive direction, getting those types of players. You see like the impact that has in the locker room and everything, but at some point, you do need to bring something. You need to be able to be like, well, he is on the roster because he brings this to the table on the court if we needed him in a game. And I'm with you that I don't know what that is yet. And they very well might pick up the option and be like, it'll be worth it. But I agree with you that it is unfortunate that we have to have a discussion about, is that a decision? Because we both think it is something that you have to at least ponder.
It's an open question. I think that's the question that the front office is asking themselves now in connection to their first round pick a year ago. That's
right. It's a first round pick. I mean, that's late, part of the thing. Late, like 25 or something. But like it's not like this was a 50th pick. Like.
Yeah, no, we will see there. The last thing from this game I want to hit on is Leonard Miller. I asked Finch a question about Leonard after the game. Play that clip quickly.
Chris, before the game, you're talking about Leonard and just all the talent and the rawness. I think probably saw both of those tonight. Yeah. As a coach, how do you approach that type of player, and what is the development process, I guess, look like? What are you guys working on with him?
We're working on just again, like I said, pre-game, just trying to firm up like a role and a style of play for him. He's never had anyone kind of connect all the dots for him. He's just always kind of gone out and played, and which is great. I think that's where some of his feel comes from. But you have to kind of rein him in a little bit, or he'll we need him to run. We need him to roll more. We need him to value being in the dunker. And these are things that are going to get him opportunities early in his career before you allow him to like play with the ball and that kind of stuff. But you can see he has some real natural feel with the ball in his hands. You don't always know how it's going to end up, but he's fearless, and we like that. He reminds us a little bit of Vando when Vando was here, like also kind of ball hawk, better with the ball than you thought, good feel for the game, that kind of stuff. So, and he shoots it, well. He's got a good foundation, I think, to improve that shot. So I think there's obviously lots to work on there, but he's an exciting young player, and a really good kid, and he's soaking it all up right now.
Jace, this kind of connects to the Wendell thing. I didn't really think about it, but we've heard with Finch, like the praise he gives, like high praise from Finch is when he calls someone fearless.
Yeah.
And when we ask about like other teams, he'll mention that about a player that you can tell he really respects is he's fearless. And I think that's the one thing that is holding Wendell Moore back a little bit is maybe some anxiety around and fear around being able to execute there. Leonard does have this confidence in his feel that he's developed for the reasons that Finch said there. And I think that's what allows him to go out and have what he had last night, like 22 and 15, 8 offensive rebounds, right? There's a confidence about Leonard Miller and an athletic profile there. The shooting thing, I'm still kind of like, I'm not sure
I know.
about
When they talk about that, I'm like, I do not see that foundation.
But again, that's another one of those where
correct.
obviously they've seen much more of it than we are. I think it
but just
Finch
like
gave him a lot of compliments there. He didn't need to throw in that extra one, which maybe, I don't know. Maybe that
I always laugh though when I hear like the shooting thing and it's totally like, I just watched the game. I did not see that. But
yeah. I mean,
maybe
I think
there probably are a few
Miller's the center.
foundational things. Like, I would agree with that. Like foundational things in a shot where they're like, well, that's really good, like base or whatever. But I just watched some things. I'm like, no, but it's totally fine. Like he doesn't need to be some elite shooter to be a really good NBA player. I agree with you. This kind of center. I think the Vando mold makes a lot of sense. Maybe like a slightly more ball skilled Vando, like that. That's a really good player. Like no qualms with that. I think I just wanted to get one thing out of the Wendell Moore thing out of my head is like, it's one more, it's like an experiment of, does a good college glue guy make for a good NBA glue guy?
Yeah.
And where so often it's like, you have to find a college player who was like one of the 2 best players on his team, but see traits that will make him a good NBA glue guy. So I think like Wendell is like the rare thing where I like watching these guys play too in college. It's like, wow, look, he's a good connector. He does everything right. But does that mean you can do that also at the NBA level? Or do you have to show certain abilities, certain skills, and then have the willingness to become a glue guy at the NBA level?
Yeah. And Leonard's kind of like an interestingly opposite of that.
He's got these great skills, and
didn't play at a college program, like basically played. I mean, Ignite is basically like elevated AAU.
Yes, that is 100%. I've watched more Ignite like pre-draft film than I ever have before. It is very much like elevated AAU. It's not much structure,
for the good parts
direction.
too, where you're like, damn, like athletes.
Yes,
these guys, like you can
allowed to show that.
Yeah, but there's no like,
you get the full breadth of what you can do.
There's no Wendell Moores out there. There's no like, okay, I'm just operating off of this, quickly getting off the ball and relocating.
Even their veterans don't do that. Like even like the John Jenkins isn't out there doing that.
John Jenkins, yeah. I am. It's an inverted thing with Miller of like figuring this out for him is going to be whenever he gets his chance. And I would say it's at least a year down the road. Like you need to really narrow the focus of what that thing is first. And
Finch always calls it left and right bumpers.
Left and right bumpers,
guys.
And for me, my opinion of just like those type of players, like particularly when they're young and they're hungry and they can get on the glass, I start those guys at 5.
Sure.
That's I think a simplistic role in the dunker spot. I do think Leonard Miller is going to at some time like be able to handle a little bit and pass a little bit, but until he can do that without heavy turnovers, put him in a spot where he's not asked to do that. Just get offensive, be Vando. Just be Vando. Like that's where I want to see him start. And then you kind of build off of that. It's like, okay, maybe he's a 4 now. Maybe he spaces the corner. Maybe in a couple of years, like actually we're playing him at the 3 a little bit. Like he's dribbling it a little bit. We're setting a pick and roll screen for him every so often. Like I think the progression for Leonard Miller is 5, then 4, then 3 over the course of time. And the ability, having the physical ability to be able to do that is a major win. I just think it's going to be a pretty long road with him. And I think they knew that. I think they drafted him accordingly.
There's just a difference between like playing for like last year's Portland team where like you can go do whatever, you guys are going to lose by 20, but you'll be able to show like the things you can do. And it's like, look, like this guy can hit the glass. Like, look, he's got a little bit of handle. Look, this night he hit 3 threes. Like, and you see like, it's like, well, he could help a team. It's such a different role being able to kind of do whatever and just flash your abilities. And they kind of brush over all the warts because who cares? They stink.
Yeah.
It's not the same as playing on a good team and trying to help a good team win at a high level because there's no room for you to go out there and like freelance on your own because they've got enough like elite players freelancing on their own. They need to know what you're going to bring and they need you to execute your role.
The one thing. It's the one thing, right?
Yep. Yeah. It's the one thing. It's whatever. Like, and I asked Leonard Miller last night and he's like, I think like rebounding and defense. And I would agree with that. And that's the easiest to do at like the 5, like you mentioned early in his career. Like we said, we don't expect him to be a contributor this year. I would be stunned. I would be absolutely stunned. But if he wants to play next year, the year after that, like those are things he's going to have to hone in on as long as this team remains in a position where it expects to contend at a high level.
Absolutely. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks, prizepicks.com or the Prize Picks app. You can use promo code Dane for a $100 sign-up bonus. Jason, I make Prize Picks every Wednesday from the Wednesday or the Thursday slate of games here. I'm trying to put this up on the screen and make it happen here. Jace, I'm looking at this Jaguars Saints matchup, and the two I put up here this morning were Derek Carr more than 236.5 passing yards and Christian Kirk more than 51.5 receiving yards. I just think like
these work out really well with mine, so I'm glad you put these. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And me and
we're
Jace
going for another 4-0 parlay.
We're going for another 4-0 here. We did do that last week. I think we were 3-1 the week before that as well. I just feel like I'm not saying Carr's a great quarterback, but like if you just kind of look at, I did look at his numbers, like week 1 over 300 yards, last week almost like 350, and in that in between time he was hurt.
Yeah.
And so much of these numbers that they put together are just like pretty much straight averages. And so I think there's a little bit of value in Derek Carr to throw for more than 236.5 passing yards. And then I was kind of struggling to find another one, but like Christian Kirk of the receivers in this game was like 5th or something, like up for both teams in total receiving yards. And I don't know, like I feel like at this point, like Christian Kirk should be projected to get more yards than Calvin Ridley, and he's not on here. So I thought a little bit of value on those two. I didn't have any of my touchdown options, or maybe they do have it up here now. They didn't earlier this morning.
Oh wow, they did not as a
right, I think this literally podcast literally just came up. I like those. I like the touchdown ones where it's 2 players to score more or less than 0.5 touchdowns in the game. They have Alvin Kamara and Evan Ingram for 1, Calvin Ridley and Chris Olave, Christian Kirk and Michael Thomas. I'm not sure I love any of those to be more than 0.5. But anyways, those are my 2.
Right. Yeah, I'm sticking with the ones I had. If I started right now, I would take a Kirk Thomas under because they're not really. But I'm not going to. That's not one of mine.
Okay.
I'm going with receiving yards, and I'm taking the Calvin Ridley less than.
Okay, so we're kind of on the same page.
Yeah, and just like the Saints have a really good defense. I'm totally fine with like. That's why I liked yours. I was like, well, if Kirk goes over, I'm even more confident in Ridley going under. We don't know about Lawrence's health.
And we want all 4 to come together.
Yeah. Come on. We're going for a second straight canvas parlay. Yeah. And then I'm taking Rashid Shaheed over 35.5. He's done that in 3 of the 4 games he's played.
He's going to have like 70 or 12.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, he's went 89, 63, 0, 85.
That's true.
And the 0, I don't know if he played that whole game. He probably did, but that was the Packers game where Carr got hurt. I like Shaheed to go over that. He's literally like 1 play away from always going over that. So
I'm with that. Okay, so those are our 4 this week. Again, if you hit 4 in conjunction, you can get 10-1 on whatever you wagered. So last week, if we put 20 on the 4 that we got correct, that would have been for 200. Obviously you can do more or less than 4 if you want. Those are the ones we choose 4 for this. But if you're looking for something else, maybe your fantasy team's like 1-5 right now.
Maybe you don't have anybody in this game for fantasy.
Exactly. And like I think I mentioned this with Kyle before too, but they have like some NBA like season long ones here where it's like, the points like Steph Curry more or less than 28.9 points per game averaged this season, or rebounds, or whatever it might be. I would understand if you're listening to this podcast, you're like, why are you guys talking about football? I don't want, there's plenty of basketball stuff on there as well. Me and Jace and Kyle just mostly find this fun. And wanted to let you know that Prize Picks is an option. PrizePicks.com or the Prize Picks app, promo code Dane for $100 sign up bonus. We'll see if Jace and I can go 4 for 4 again. Anything else before we go? Oh, actually, I have one. Dacian Nix. I wanted to mention that.
Okay.
Like I wish I would have talked about him on the pod before. I think I mentioned to you, or it was like Britt, just in like passing. He intrigues me, and part of that is because I watched him at Ignite, like a handful of those games back a couple years ago when he was there with Jalen Green and Kuminga. One of my friends works for the Rockets, so I would that would be a random like league pass team that I would tune into from time to time. And he's just a unique type of player, body type. Obviously, if you watch the game last night, he's a big dude, but he was like a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, is like a natural point guard, but also kind of has that like confidence of a guy, I feel like, who came up as a highly recruited player. I think he was committed to UCLA, ended up doing like Ignite. Like he would have been, I think, a pretty noteworthy college basketball player had he taken that route. And I mentioned him. He's not, he's just on a training camp deal right now, but the Wolves do have
those 2-way spots are still up for grabs. Correct. I mean,
anybody who
anybody who signs a 2-way though, like you can get bumped out before the season starts, and those Exhibit 10s are specifically for like guys going into those 2-way spots, like
or the G League just in general.
Yeah. They very much make it easy to just move you onto the Iowa Wolves roster, but like it is always a legitimate competition, like of just because you signed a 2-way deal in the summer, like it is so easy to bump you off that and move somebody else into it before the season starts. Like training camp is a competition for those spots.
Yeah. And like call a spade. I think it's Matt Ryan, right?
Yes.
Is the one. And, again, we have limited exposure to, we got to see him play last night. But do they pivot off of that and pivot off of Matt Ryan and move in one of these younger players? Cause it's not just Dacian Nix, it's Tyrese Martin, Trevor Keels, and Vit Krejci. They all, played in the NBA last season. They're younger. I just wouldn't be surprised if one replaces Matt Ryan, or maybe Luka gets an NBA deal. They turn his 2-way. There is an open roster spot, right?
Right.
Or maybe they sign one of those guys to the open roster spot on a non-guaranteed deal, right? Where he kind of like Austin Rivers last year, with like a third of the season guaranteed. It's like, well, we'll see if we'll keep you. And for me, I would just say Dacian Nix would be the guy that I would be most intrigued by. I also think positionally it makes the most sense. He's your third traditional point guard on this roster at the moment, behind Conley and McLaughlin. I think that's the greatest position of need. So I just wanted to be at some point on the record to be like, I'm intrigued by this guy. And I thought last night, in the context of again, capital P preseason game, looked as good as anybody did.
It's just one of those where, like, if you commit yourself to like this roster build, like we always talk about how it's going to be almost impossible to do that with like this core moving forward. But like, no matter what, like you're going to have some really, like, you're going to lose exceptions, like stuff like that. Like you're going to have to find cheap ways.
That has to be this front office's superpower,
right?
The next
finding the cheapest ways to fill out with like guys who can contribute. Like,
and I would say Nikhil was an example of that last year. I mean, that's an elevated version. I would say Luka is probably more in this vein, right? Where it's like, okay, yeah, this is a guy we feel like is an NBA player. We locked him in for a 2-way. There's value in that,
right?
Like, and then maybe it builds over time in the way that Nikhil has. But this front office has to do that. And I'm intrigued by these training camp invite guys because they're both young and have NBA experience. And Nix is the top of the list for me.
Right. Yeah. And you have to decide at some point, like, what is the long-term value? Like, if it comes down to Nix and Matt Ryan, like, what's the long-term value of us having Matt Ryan here?
Yeah.
Like, do we see a path where he is helping us at any point in time. If the answer is no, then what's the point?
Yes. And Daishen Nick's absolutely awful numbers in the NBA in his 2 years. And I think with Matt Ryan, there's like a level of like understood stability in that. Like he does have the one skill thing, right? In theory of the just being the shooter. I think Matt is like a solid positional defender. Like I would get if they kept with him. I'm not like pounding the table. Like that guy definitely needs to go because they have all this loaded training camp talent behind him. But the upside,
it's just a decision, right?
It's just a decision. That perfect.
And this is the type of team that you just like. There are some teams where it's like you might use your two-way guys. Like this team's not going to use its two-way players unless things go so off the rails where it's like it doesn't even matter anymore. Right? Exactly. Yeah. It's.
Mm-hmm. So okay, I got that out there. You have anything else from that game? I don't know how the hell we talked for an hour coming off of that game last night, but
we didn't talk too much about the game. That's probably for the
that's probably why. A week from now is the first Wolves game. Jace and I will be back. We'll maybe record that one on Tuesday night or something to get that out before Wednesday's season opener against the Raptors. Wolves again on Thursday this week in Chicago. Britt and I tomorrow on Thursday are going to preview the guards position. We've done the bigs and the wings thus far, and then Kyle and I will be here on Friday. Jace, as always, appreciate you doing it, man.
Thanks, man.
All right, you can follow Jace on Twitter, and until tomorrow with Britt, he's Jace at Jace Frederick. I'm Dane at Dane Moore NBA.
But nobody's gonna get it for me. How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Grinning hard so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah. Hope you dancing like